Our life is shaped by our mind, for we become what we think. These simple lines are both the subtlest and most practical in the Dhammapada, which is the Buddha's collection of sayings written down by other people. The words are too rich for any translation to convey their meaning fully. Literally, they say, mind is the forerunner of all dharmas. All follow the mind. All are made out of mind. Dharmas has a double edge here. It means at the same time both things and thoughts. So when we see the word dharma singular, that means a spiritual law that one is meant to follow to achieve the goal of awakening. But when we see dharmas plural, this means the interconnected elements of the universe that make up objective reality. To the Buddha, everything is a dharma, a mental event. We don't really experience the world, he observes. We experience constructs in the mind made up of information from the senses. This information is already in kind of a code form. We don't actually see things, for example. We interpret as separate objects a mass of electrochemical impulses received by the brain. And of course, this information covers only a narrow range of sensibility, limited to what the senses can actually register. But from this scanty data, the mind creates an entire world. We have grown used to the idea that there is much more out there than we can be aware of. But this is not what the Buddha is saying. He drops the convention of out there altogether. Everything in experience is mind. What we call things are objects in consciousness. Not that they are imaginary, but their characteristics are mental constructions. Like the other skandhas, and a skandha in Sanskrit just means an aggregate or clump of describing features of reality. Like the other skandhas, form is a category of mind. As I was driving to the beach for a walk, it struck me that from far off, the sand appears solid. Only when we stand on it and touch it can we see it as really billions of little particles. The same is true even with things that are really solid, such as a boulder at the water's edge. Physicists resolve even subatomic particles into energy, making substance a tool for everyday communication rather than a description of reality. Similarly, the Buddha reduces all experience of things and ourselves to dharmas. Deep in consciousness, a common sense experience like a beautiful sunset resolves into skandha-like events, like sight contact of color patterns, accompanied by pleasurable sensations. There is no self in such events, and no real distinction between the observer and observed. The Buddha, I think, would not have been surprised by the discoveries of this century which turned classical physics upside down. The essential discontinuity in nature observed by quantum physicists follows naturally from the Buddha's experience of the discontinuity of thought. So does the idea that time is discontinuous, which I think might also find its place in physics someday. We have to be very careful of misunderstanding here. The Buddha is not saying that the physical world is a figment of our imagination. That would imply a real world to compare with, and this is the real world. We are not making it up, but neither are we misperceiving a reality out there where things are solid and individuals are separate. What the Buddha is telling us is precisely parallel to what quantum physicists say. When we examine the universe closely, it dissolves into discontinuity and a flux of fields of energy. But in the Buddha's universe, the mind-matter duality is gone. These are fields of consciousness. When Einstein talked about clocks slowing down in a powerful gravitational field, or when Heisenberg said that we can determine either the momentum or the position of an electron, but not both, most physicists felt a natural tendency to treat these as apparent aberrations, like the illusion that a stick bends when placed in a glass of water. It took decades for physicists to accept that there is no real universe, like the real stick, to refer to without an observer. Clocks really do slow down, and electrons really are indeterminable. That is the way the universe actually is. Similarly, the Buddha would say, this universe we talk of is made of mind. There is no real world in itself apart from our perceiving of it. This doesn't make physical reality any less physical. It only reminds us that what we see in the world is shaped by the structure of consciousness. This has radical implications, one of which is that mind and matter are different ways of looking at the same thing. Today we are used to thinking of matter as frozen energy. Mind too can be considered like energy in a different form. You may remember Bohr's principle of complementarity. To get a whole picture of light, we have to describe it as waves and as particles at the same time. Similarly, the Buddha would say, if we look at experience one way, in the ordinary waking state, we see physical reality. If we look at it another way, we see mind. In profound meditation, one goes beyond sensory experience and eventually beyond the very structure of the phenomenal world, time, space, and causality. Time stops. There is only the present moment. Then everything is pure energy, an ocean of light. Some of you may want to ask, matter and mind are different aspects of what? It's all very well to say consciousness, but what does that even mean? Like most quantum physicists, however, the Buddha doesn't try to explain further. The question doesn't make sense. It can't be answered without creating confusion and contradiction, and anyway, it is completely unnecessary. When you ask a physicist what ultimate reality is like, he or she likely is to reply, "We can describe accurately, and that's enough. The laws are the reality." The Buddha does the same thing. He says, this is the way the universe is. If you want to know more, go see for yourself. This is not heady philosophy. It has some surprisingly practical implications. One is that we see life as we are. The world of our experience is partly of our own making, colored and distorted by the past experiences that each person identifies with a personal ego. My relationship with you is not with you as you see yourself, but with you as I see you, a waxworks creation in my mind. As a result, two people can share the same house and literally live in different worlds. If these ideas were better understood, they could make our planet a very different place. There's an old story in India about two men, one high-minded and generous, the other very selfish, who were sent to foreign lands and asked to tell what kind of people they found there. The first reported that he found people basically good at heart, not very different from those at home. The second man felt envious hearing this, because in the place he visited, everyone was selfish, scheming, and cruel. Both, of course, were describing the same land. We see as we are, and our foreign policy follows what we see. Those who see themselves surrounded by a hostile world preparing for war tend to make that vision a reality. So, it follows that when we change ourselves, we have already begun to change the world. Heisenberg taught physicists that in subatomic realms, the observer affects the observation. The way we ask an experimental question determines the kind of answer we will get. In the Buddha's universe, this is true for all experience. If a hostile person learns to slow down his thinking enough to see how much of what he provokes in himself is projected by his own mind, his world changes, and so does his behavior, which in turn changes the world for those around him. Little by little, the Buddha says, we make ourselves good, as a bucket fills with water drop by drop. Little by little, too, we change the world we live in. Even the grand earth-shaking events of history have their origins in individual thought.